I do research on North Korea. The company I work for, Intermedia, has been doing this for about the last 15 years, and I've been heading up the program for about the last 5 years. We look at outside information getting into North Korea. We look at the way this changes North Koreans' perceptions of the outside world, cross-border traffic of people and goods and information. Unlike a lot of the research that gets done on North Korea, we focus on grassroots. We look at how ordinary North Korean people interact with their environment and what that can tell us about the state as a whole. Luckily, we have a lot more sources of information available to us today than we did, 15, 20 years ago. We're able to, all those same kind of flows that are taking, information into the country, taking people back and forth across the Chinese border, also allow us to get information out of the country and try to understand the environment there a little better. And even things you wouldn't expect, like the availability of commercial satellite imagery, now we can get a sense of the geographical layout of North Korea when we talk to people from these places. Do you guys know Kim Jong-nam? He's Kim Jong-il's son, Kim Jong-un's older brother. And he had this habit of popping up in the international media every once in a while and just saying things that you knew pissed off his dad about the family. And so before I present, I'm going to give you guys a few of the statistics that we've collected. But before I present those, I like to have him pop in and say hi and remind us that there are a lot of caveats that come with this research. We work really hard on it to try to make it as sound and scientific as possible. But that said, we're mostly talking to people who have left the country and will never be able to completely control for the X factor of what makes someone who left different from someone who stayed. I think that factor is getting a little smaller as we find more and more normal kind of North Koreans are getting out, chain defections and things like that. But there are a lot of caveats to keep in mind as I start jumping in. So as I said, a lot of our research has focused on the information environment in North Korea. And it has changed so much in the last 15, 20 years. The famine period in the mid-late 90s was an extremely important turning point. After that, people had to come up with these coping mechanisms to survive. And whether that meant trading across the border or foraging for things, but they couldn't rely on the state anymore. And so as a result, they didn't trust the state as much anymore. And they had to look for sources of information that in some cases could be really useful to the businesses they were now involved in. And at the same time, that parallels nicely with a very porous border with China and a lot of cheap information devices getting in. So when we show slides like this, and I'll note for you guys that I only have so much that I can kind of share publicly, so this is a little bit dated now. This is from a 2010 survey, but even that gives you an idea of just kind of the level of access to information devices that North Koreans have. People are often really shocked by this because they think most isolated country in the world. How is it possible that they have access to such a wide array of media devices? But that's how they're learning about the outside world. And I can tell you, this stuff down the end here, it's growing at really rapid rates. Until very recently, we weren't even asking about USBs. And in the last several years, we find that they're starting to replace DVDs as the way people like to watch their dramas and movies. They're safer and easier to conceal. You can carry more on them. And so these things develop pretty quickly. When we look at the kinds of media that people receive, we generally think of these three main types. There are others, but these are the three types we tend to focus on. Foreign radio is at a disadvantage kind of presentation and experience-wise because listening to crackly shortwave radio in the middle of the night is never going to be as compelling as like watching Lee Hyori shake her butt or Daniel Henney take off his shirt. I'm looking for the Eat Your Kimchi guys to apologize for my really dated references. But foreign radio has a very important function. It's the only real-time source of sensitive information in North Korea. It refreshes every night, and these programs are made for North Koreans. There's staffs in DC, in Seoul, and other places who spend their days putting together news stories they think will work for North Koreans and inform them about the outside world and their own country. Foreign TV is also pretty important, but it's pretty geographically limited. People along the Chinese border can receive it from Yeonbyeon, from some Korean language Chinese broadcasts. And along the southern border, some of them can get KBS and MBC, other broadcasts from South Korea. But people in the middle of the country, people in Pyongyang, generally don't have a TV option. And then we get to foreign DVDs, foreign dramas and movies. And this is by far the most widely accessed form of foreign media in North Korea. And it's one that we've just seen incredible growth in. the way we do these surveys, we talk to people who've been out of the country for varying amounts of time. You are not supposed to be able to see this track like that. And yet, we do, year on year. And it's incredible. And I can tell you this growth trend continues. That last slide had 63%, and that's because that next year we have 63%. And then after that, we're close to 80. It's really incredible to watch this growth, and something we really didn't expect when we started this. So normally, at this point in a presentation, some more skeptical type says, so what? So all North Koreans have seen Winter Sonata. What does that matter? And we have a lot of indirect ways that we can argue it matters. But we spent a lot of time trying to figure out if we could find a robust kind of direct measure of why this could matter. And so we did a lot of, I won't bore you guys with the super nerdy details of this structural equation modeling we have up here. But if you want to nerd out later, come find me. Basically, what we were able to show in a surprisingly robust way is that those who had access to outside media, information, even entertainment, were much more predisposed to think favorably about South Korea, the US, the outside world. And even if you're looking at things from kind of high policy level, in the event of a contingency, if you're the US, you want people favorably disposed toward you when things are getting a bit messy. But, says another skeptical person normally in the presentation, this is North Korea. This is one of the most intense police states in the world. How is it possible that people are able to access this information? Aren't they getting caught and punished? And it's still a really scary thing to do. Watching foreign media is sensitive. However, there are a couple reasons why these phenomena have been able to happen. One is because essentially the people who are charged with cracking down on foreign media use, their incentive structure is different than it used to be. Back in the day, money didn't matter as much in North Korea, and so it made sense to catch someone who is doing something wrong, turn them into your superior, get kudos, get rewards. Now, in the new North Korea, where money matters a lot more, it's in the interest of these people to take a bribe. And so now, often, you can bribe your way out of doing something that formerly would have ended you in a prison camp. The one scary part about that is that there still are directives from on high. So you can pay a bribe 9 times and be fine, and then on the 10th time, he says, oh no, I got to take you in or I get in trouble. So there is still a really scary kind of arbitrary nature to the punishments that happen, but in general, people can get away with a lot more. And the other thing that I think is maybe even more important, which is reflected in this quote up here, is that people are not turning each other in the way they used to. A big pillar of the North Korean kind of control mechanisms was that they tried to cut off all horizontal connections people had. They wanted you not to trust anyone else around you. And so, in the battle Kim Il-sung days, you had a lot of people, you'd hear these stories about, oh, a daughter turning in her parents for doing something, anti-revolutionary, or, a wife telling on her husband for doing something he wasn't supposed to do. And we really don't see that anymore the same way. The state security apparatus no longer extends into those closest social bonds like it used to. You're always going to have only so many people who are accessing these things directly. It's scary to listen to foreign radio. But if you have 20% of the population, or even less, who are taking that risk, they're going to share the really important nuggets of information with the people around them and pass that on. We ask questions about what the most important source of information for people in North Korea is, and time again, they say, word of mouth, rumors, what my neighbor tells me. That's where most people get their information. And so if they're getting good information from outside media, that feeds right into these word of mouth networks that are established. Most people who watch foreign DVDs do it with friends and relatives. They no longer think that their friends and relatives are going to turn them in, and it creates a social activity out of something that is expressly illegal. Although it is important to point out that big fat zero in the others column. So it's still, you don't go telling people who you don't trust about your illegal behaviors. This behavior is so normalized now, watching foreign DVDs, that there are signifiers that are really subtle. 당연하지, of course, is a really innocuous phrase. But, people would hear it and say, oh, they've heard something from South Korea. And it's a way that you can kind of you're bonding and saying, oh, we're both doing something we're not supposed to be. And that's a really kind of impressive social bond to be able to create. So to kind of keep with the theme, even though I know I technically don't qualify as being in the group, talk a little bit about millennials in North Korea, because they are a really fascinating subgroup in our research. And in pursuit of the almighty dollar is really one of the defining characteristics. They don't subscribe to the same system that their parents did. Young North Koreans never knew a time when that system was functioning. You know, most of them don't have any strong living memory of the public distribution system giving them anything. Given the reality of North Korea, the propaganda they're sold, and then kind of the lives they lead, it creates these really interesting characteristics that almost seem contradictory in some ways. So they're aspirational in that they're trying hard to kind of take control of their own economic destiny and make a good life for themselves. But they're cynical in that they don't believe anything they're told until they find it in their hand. You know, they're escapists. They watch, you know, North Korean or South Korean dramas to kind of get away from the harsh realities in North Korea, but they're super pragmatist. When we interview people for the radio stations and we ask them, oh, what do you want to hear on foreign radio? Time and time again, market prices, supply shocks that could influence my, you know, kind of trading operations, you know, any sort of, you know, goods that might be popular, anything that will help me make money, do my business better. They're really kind of the embodiments of the new North Korea. And so the way they express their dissatisfaction actually looks really different too. If you ask their parents who remember a time when the system was functioning in North Korea, what would you think if Kim Jong-un really got his act together and the public distribution system started up again and you didn't have to worry about all this? And you can get a lot of them to say, you know, there were a lot of easier things back in the good old days. That would be cool. But young people, not for a second. They always say, there's no kind of rosy glasses about what the past was. They say, no, what we want is some loosening and reform so that we can do our businesses better and succeed. Two events that have come up a lot in research recently that highlight the really different relationship between the young society in North Korea and the state are the currency reform in 2009. And this was essentially a really punitive action in which the North Korean government revalued the currency. And it means that all these people who were kind of in the new North Korea saving to get by and like actually thought, oh, maybe I've created a little nest egg, maybe things won't be as scary. That savings was wiped out in an instant. The state really did something that hurt them where it mattered. And so a lot of young people who were kind of disengaged with the state said, oh, well, maybe I can just live my life and, you know, sure, the state is kind of a pain in the butt occasionally, but I can live my life around it. The state came back in and said, no, you can't. And it was really impactful. And I don't think actually a lot of North Korea researchers have put enough time and effort into understanding what a huge impact that event had on the psyche of a lot of these North Koreans. The other is the centennial of Kim Il-sung's birthday, which was a couple years ago. There was so much kind of propaganda run-up in like, oh, well, at Kim Il-sung's 100th birthday, we're going to give you all these gifts and things are, like, we're going to be a strong and prosperous nation was the line. And when it came, you know, a few well-placed people in Pyongyang got 100 little gifts, but mostly it was a total letdown and people got nothing or very little. And, you know, for all this big propaganda ramp up, they didn't see any change. So it's a really interesting kind of subgroup to study, and one that I'm really glad you guys are getting to engage with. And foreign media is part of that story, mostly because being as kind of disengaged with their own state as they are, foreign media gives them the ability to imagine an alternative and actually see it in front of them. And so even if they're not learning things that change their lives drastically, it's allowing them to imagine what a different situation might look like. It's been a rough couple years under Kim Jong-un lately. There's been a lot of crackdowns, but true retrenchment is no longer possible. You know, North Koreans are not going to unknow the things they already know. They can't turn back the clock. And you know, I think we see, as is evidenced here with you all, that there is a role for outsiders to play as kind of catalysts to these changes. So why is there a dead old white guy on the screen? This is Lord Bulwer-Lytton. So Link gave me the title of my talk today, Why the USB is Mightier Than the Nuke. And I immediately started thinking, oh, I know that quote. That's from this dude. You know, he's actually said a lot of really interesting things that are kind of related to this North Korea situation. And so all the weird phrases that were in orange throughout this presentation are all adapted quotes of his. In pursuit of the almighty dollar, one of the sublimest things in the world is simple truth. Why did I do this? And the reason is because I'm a massive nerd. I get so much joy out of just being a big, fat nerd. And luckily for me, and actually luckily for me, Justin and Tony both told me that nerds have come back around and said that my tweed jacket with elbow patches was actually cool. So I'm feeling pretty confident up here right now, actually. And so that's the one little thing I'm going to leave you guys with, is to encourage you to be a nerd. Going through the last couple days here, incredibly inspiring, incredibly moving. I know it's going to make you want to get out there and do your best to affect change in this situation. What I want to encourage you guys to do is to be armed with as much knowledge as you can, because that will really bring things home. When you can not only talk about something with a lot of passion, but then you have the knowledge about the situation, from the history that Dr. Terry explained to the nerdy statistics that I like. If you guys are armed with that, you'll be much more effective. And it is such an important issue, as has been demonstrated, that we need to kind of approach it with the rigor that it deserves. And so thanks so much for letting me be a part of this, guys, and talk to you soon.